While I was fighting stage 4 cancer, my husband moved his mistress into our home. He didn't know my doctor was recording everything. 3 months of chemotherapy. 3 months where Orlando transformed our sanctuary into their love nest while thinking I was too weak to notice. As I lay in my hospital bed, cataloging each betrayal through the hidden cameras Dr. Nicolette had installed, I realized that my diagnosis wasn't just saving my life. It was exposing the truth about the man I married. The pain started in my lower back, dull at first, easy to dismiss as the consequence of long hours at the university where I taught medieval literature. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Orlando insisted it was just stress, that I was working too hard on my book about women's agency in Arthurian legends. "Take an aspirin, Rosalie," he'd say, barely looking up from his phone. "You're imagining things again." But the pain persisted, grew sharper, more insistent. When I finally collapsed during a lecture, they rushed me to Memorial Hospital, where Dr. Nicolette Bernard delivered the news no one wants to hear. Advanced ovarian cancer with metastasis to the lymph nodes and spine. "We need to start treatment. Immediately," she said, her kind eyes steady on mine as Orlando gripped my hand so tightly it hurt. He was the perfect husband those first few weeks. Attentive, concerned, practically living at the hospital. He charmed the nurses, brought me flowers, held my hair back as the initial treatments ravaged my body. "We'll get through this together," he promised, kissing my forehead as I drifted in and out of consciousness. For better or for worse, remember? I believed him then. Why wouldn't I? 15 years of marriage had taught me to trust the literature professor who'd swept me off my feet with poetry quotes and midnight picnics under star-filled skies. The man who'd supported my academic career, who'd nursed me through pneumonia, 3 years ago, who still left love notes in my desk drawer every anniversary. The first sign came after my second round of chemotherapy, when the fatigue had settled into my bones like lead. Orlando's visits grew shorter, his excuses more elaborate, department meetings, manuscript deadlines, student conferences that somehow always ran late. Dr. Nicolette noticed before I did, her frown deepening each time she entered my room to find me alone. "He's struggling with this," I defended him, wincing as she checked my surgical sites. "Some people can't handle hospitals, can't face mortality." Dr. Nicolette's silence spoke volumes. Later that day, she sat beside my bed, her tablet in hand. "Rosalie," she said quietly, "how much do you know about your husband's assistant, Emma?" The name was familiar. The bright doctoral candidate who'd been helping Orlando organize his research for the past year. Pretty, of course. Brilliant, by all accounts. 28 to his 47. I'd met her at department functions, noted, the way she looked at him with undisguised admiration. But I'd never felt threatened. Orlando and I had built something unshakable, hadn't we? "I need to show you something," Dr. Nicolette continued, her voice gentle but firm. She handed me her tablet, open to a security camera feed. I recognized our house, the Victorian we'd painstakingly restored together, the home I hadn't seen in weeks. The timestamp showed yesterday afternoon. Orlando was leading Emma through our front door, her hand clasped in his. They weren't behaving like colleagues. The way she pressed against him as he fumbled with his keys, the hungry kiss they shared before even closing the door, the familiar way she navigated our home. This wasn't new. This wasn't a moment of weakness. "I'm so sorry," Dr. Nicolette whispered as I watched Emma casually drop her bag on my reading chair, slip off her shoes and pad barefoot into my kitchen, my sanctuary, where she opened the refrigerator with the comfortable entitlement of someone who had done it many times before. "How did you get this?" My voice sounded distant, hollow even to my own ears. "One of my nurses lives across the street from you, Claudine. She noticed patterns, people coming and going when they shouldn't be. She mentioned it to me because she was concerned about home care preparations for your eventual discharge. Dr. Nicolette hesitated. I took the liberty of having some monitoring equipment installed. For your safety. I wanted to laugh at the euphemism, but the sound that escaped was closer to a sob. My safety. Medical surveillance, she clarified, meeting my eyes directly. As your physician, I need to ensure your recovery environment is suitable. Understanding dawned slowly through the haze of pain medications and shock. You've been gathering evidence. She nodded once, decisive. I've seen too many patients return to toxic environments that undermine their recovery. Cancer treatment isn't just about medicine, Rosalie. It's about eliminating all malignancies from your life. A week earlier, I might have defended Orlando, might have searched for explanations or excuses. But as I swiped through the footage, Emma wearing my robe, sleeping in my bed, rearranging my bookshelves, the evidence was undeniable. They weren't even being discreet? Why would they? Everyone believed I was too sick, too medicated, too focused on survival to notice? There's more, Dr. Nicolette said quietly, taking back the tablet and tapping open another file. Financial records, property transfers, changes to your health directives and power of attorney. I stared at the documents, my academic mind cataloging details even as my heart splintered. Orlando had been systematically transferring our joint assets, redirecting my university pension, altering my medical directives to give himself sole decision-making power. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Everything had started shortly after my diagnosis, accelerating as my condition worsened. He's planning for my death, I said flatly, the words hanging in the sterile hospital air. Not just planning, for it, banking on it, preparing for it with a thoroughness that chilled me to my core. Dr. Nicolette's expression remained professional, but I caught the flash of anger in her eyes. Or ensuring you don't recover enough to question him. My medical team had been optimistic about my prognosis despite the cancer's advancement. Aggressive treatment, my relative youth at 45, my previously excellent health, all factors in my favor. But Orlando had apparently been making different calculations. What now? I asked, fingers clutching the thin hospital blanket as I fought to process this new reality layered atop my diagnosis. Dr. Nicolette took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. Now we fight, both battles, the cancer and him. But we do it smart. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. He doesn't know we know. That's our advantage. As a medieval literature scholar, I'd spent my career analyzing stories of betrayal and vengeance of women using cunning to overcome those who sought to destroy them. Now, lying in my hospital bed with poison dripping into my veins to kill the cancer cells, I realized I was living in a modern version of those ancient tales. Keep recording, I told her, a new resolve hardening within me. Record everything. Before cancer rewrote my story, I was Dr. Rosalie Bennett, tenured professor of medieval literature at Westlake University, respected scholar, and devoted wife. My students called me passionate, my colleagues called me meticulous, and Orlando, he once called me the compass of his heart. Our home in the historic district was filled with books, from floor-to-ceiling shelves in the study to precarious stacks beside our bed. We'd purchased the Victorian 15 years ago, shortly after our wedding, when it was little more than a beautiful shell with good bones and bad plumbing. Weekends were spent stripping wallpaper, refinishing hardwood floors, and debating paint colors with the intensity only two academics could muster. Every doorframe had our heights marked on moving day. Every room held memories of dinner parties, quiet Sunday mornings, and heated intellectual debates that often ended in laughter or lovemaking. I had built a reputation in my field for challenging traditional interpretations of women's roles in Arthurian literature. My research focused on the agency and power of female characters often dismissed as mere plot devices. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Women in these stories are never just victims or prizes, I'd tell my students. They're strategists, survivors. They understand how to work within constraints to achieve their goals. Orlando and I had met at an academic conference in Boston. He was presenting on modernist poetry, I on Guinevere's political influence. We argued passionately during the Q&A session, continued the debate over coffee, and somehow ended up walking along the Charles River until dawn. His intellect matched mine, his passion for literature equal to my own. When he proposed a year later, quoting obscure medieval poetry beneath a willow tree in the university gardens, I felt I'd found my perfect partner. We'd decided against having children, choosing instead to pour our energy into our research, our students, our home. Our books are our legacy, Orlando would say, and I agreed. We traveled during summer breaks, Oxford, Paris, Barcelona, always with a scholarly purpose but finding time for adventures that had nothing to do with academia. We built a life of the mind that seemed unassailable. When Orlando was offered the department chair position 3 years ago, I supported him wholeheartedly, taking on extra classes to give him time to adjust to administrative duties. He'd done the same for me when I was finishing my second book. That's how our marriage worked, a balanced partnership of giving and receiving, of mutual respect and admiration. The morning of my collapse, I'd been lecturing on Morgan Le Fay, exploring how her characterization changed from healer to villain as male authors grew threatened by female power. The irony doesn't escape me now. Halfway through analyzing a passage, from Sir Thomas Malory, the room began to spin. I remember gripping the podium, trying to finish my sentence about how powerful women are often recast as monsters. Then darkness. I woke to bright lights and Orlando's worried face. "You fainted," he explained, holding my hand as Dr. Nicolette introduced herself. Even then, in those first moments, there was something in her eyes, a careful assessment that went beyond medical concern. The diagnosis came 3 days later after a battery of tests. Stage 4 ovarian cancer. Often called the silent killer, Dr. Nicolette explained gently, because symptoms can be subtle until the disease is advanced. The pain I'd attributed to long hours hunched over manuscripts had been a warning I'd ignored. Orlando wept when we received the news, his body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal and true. I comforted him, stroking his salt and pepper hair as Dr. Nicolette outlined treatment options. It would be aggressive, surgery first to remove the primary tumor, followed by intensive chemotherapy. "Your body is strong," she assured me. "You have an excellent chance of remission." The surgery was successful but grueling. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, Orlando sleeping in the chair beside my bed. He read to me, Chaucer, Malory, Tennyson, his voice a lifeline as I drifted in and out of consciousness. When I was discharged, he transformed our bedroom into a recovery sanctuary, installing a hospital bed, organizing my medications, preparing nutrient-rich meals I could barely taste as chemotherapy destroyed my appetite along with the cancer cells. "My warrior wife," he called me, kissing my forehead as he helped me to the bathroom, held my head as I vomited, washed the first clumps of hair from my pillow without comment. I believed his devotion was absolute. Then came the phone calls. Hushed. Conversations in the hallway, on the porch, in his car. Work stress, he claimed. Department politics. I didn't question it, too focused on the daily battle of survival to notice the subtle shifts. The late nights at the office, the weekend meetings, the new cologne. When I was readmitted to the hospital, for complications, an infection that took hold in my weakened body, Orlando seemed almost relieved. The constant care had been wearing on him, I reasoned. It was natural to need a break from watching someone you love suffer. Dr. Nicolette managed my infection with the same efficiency she approached everything, but I noticed her watching Orlando with increasing suspicion. He's not sleeping here. Any more? She asked one evening, checking my IV as Orlando left promptly at 8, claiming an early faculty meeting the next day. He needs his rest, I defended. He can't help me if he's exhausted. Something flickered in her expression. Concern, anger, resolution. That night, she introduced me to Nurse Claudine, who would be overseeing my evening care. Claudine lives in your neighborhood, Dr. Nicolette mentioned casually. Just across the street, I believe. I thought nothing of it then. Just a coincidence, the kind of small-world connection common in university towns. Now I understand it. Was the beginning of my salvation. Two women recognizing a pattern they'd seen too many times before. As my body fought both cancer and infection, I remained oblivious to the other battle brewing, the one where Orlando was already positioning himself as the devoted widower-to-be, with Emma waiting in the wings to console him. I didn't yet know that while I struggled for each breath, they were already planning their future in my home, with my money, over my gradually erased existence. But Dr. Nicolette knew. She recognized the signs long before I could see them myself. And she was already gathering the evidence that would save me in ways medicine alone never could. The first concrete evidence of Orlando's betrayal came on a Tuesday, exactly 7 weeks after my diagnosis. I remember the date precisely because it was the day my oncology team had scheduled a progress evaluation, a comprehensive assessment to determine whether the aggressive chemotherapy protocol was shrinking the tumors. The news had been cautiously positive. We're seeing approximately 20% reduction in the primary masses, Dr. Nicolette explained, showing me the comparative scans on her tablet. Your blood markers are trending in the right direction. The treatment is working, Rosalie. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real. Despite the ravages of chemotherapy, despite losing my hair and 15 pounds I couldn't afford to shed, despite the constant nausea and bone-deep fatigue, my body was fighting back. I wasn't just enduring, I was improving. Orlando wasn't there to hear the news. An unavoidable department meeting had kept him from accompanying me to this critical appointment. I'd assured him it was fine, that Dr. Nicolette would explain everything later. He'd kissed my forehead, a quick, distracted peck, and promised to pick up dinner on his way home. That's becoming a pattern, Dr. Nicolette observed after I'd made yet another excuse for his absence. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes held a question. He's under tremendous pressure, I said automatically. The department, his book deadline, managing everything at home. The defense felt hollow even as I offered it. Dr. Nicolette nodded, making a note in my chart. I'd like you to stay overnight for hydration and monitoring. Your electrolyte levels are concerning, and I want to run a few more tests. I didn't argue. The thought of returning to an empty house, of waiting for Orlando who might or might not appear, held little appeal. At least in the hospital, I was visible, necessary. People checked on me, asked how I was feeling, acknowledged my presence. It was late evening when Dr. Nicolette returned to my room, this time with Nurse Claudine. They closed the door, an unusual precaution that immediately put me on alert. Rosalie, we need to show you something, Dr. Nicolette said, pulling a chair close to my bed. It's difficult, but I believe you need to see it. Claudine placed a tablet in my lap, her kind face grave with concern. I'm so sorry, she said softly. The video was time-stamped 4:37 p.m., precisely when Orlando should have been in his unavoidable department meeting. Instead, he was walking up our front path with a petite blonde woman I recognized as Emma Collins, his research assistant. They weren't touching as they approached the door, maintaining a professional distance that might have reassured me if not for what happened next. The moment they stepped inside, my home, the sanctuary Orlando and I had built together, professionalism evaporated. He pressed her against the foyer wall, his hands threading through her hair as they kissed with the hungry desperation of established lovers. Emma's legs wrapped around his waist with practiced ease as he carried her toward the stairs. "Turn it off," I whispered, unable to watch more, yet unable to look away. "Please." Dr. Nicolette gently took the tablet but didn't shut it down. "There's more you need to know, Rosalie. This isn't a one-time indiscretion. This is an established relationship that began before your diagnosis." She swiped to another video, this one from 3 days earlier. Emma was in our kitchen, cooking at my stove, wearing my gardening apron. Orlando sat at the island counter, wine glass in hand, watching her with open adoration. They moved through the space with the comfortable synchronicity of a couple accustomed to sharing domestic rituals. "She's living there," I said flatly, the reality sinking in with cold clarity. "In our home, while I'm here fighting for my life." "Not officially," Claudine said, her voice gentle. "But she stays most nights. She has clothes in your closet, toiletries in your bathroom." "And Orlando's department meeting today?" I already knew the answer. "There was no meeting," Dr. Nicolette confirmed. "The university calendar shows nothing scheduled. I checked. The betrayal washed over me in waves: shock, hurt, rage, humiliation, each emotion cresting higher than the last. 15 years of marriage, of shared dreams and secret jokes, of building a life together brick by careful brick, and he couldn't even wait for a proper diagnosis before replacing me." "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "What am I supposed to do with this information while I'm tied to this hospital bed, too weak some days to even stand on my own?" Dr. Nicolette and Claudine exchanged a glance weighted with significance. "Because there's more happening than just infidelity," Dr. Nicolette said carefully. Claudine noticed some concerning patterns, which prompted us to install these security cameras. "Initially, it was about ensuring your home would be properly maintained for your recovery. But we discovered something disturbing," Claudine continued. "Orlando has been bringing people through your house, financial advisors, real estate appraisers. He's been removing items, personal papers, family heirlooms, your research materials." Dr. Nicolette pulled up another video. "Orlando in my study, rifling through my desk drawers, extracting folders and placing documents into a banker's box. Emma helping him, methodically emptying filing cabinets of papers related to my research, my finances, my life. He's erasing me," I whispered, the terrible reality crystallizing, piece by piece. "We believe he's preparing for a scenario where you don't recover," Dr. Nicolette said, her clinical tone belied by the anger flashing in her eyes. "Our hospital ethics officer has been alerted to unusual queries from Orlando about your advance, directives and medical power of attorney." The implications crashed over me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Orlando finding comfort in another woman's arms while I suffered. This was about actively hoping for, perhaps even ensuring, my permanent absence. What exactly has he been asking about? My academic mind kicked in, automatically cataloging details, searching for patterns. Specifically, he's been exploring what would happen if your condition deteriorated suddenly, what his rights would be regarding treatment withdrawal, whether your living will could be reinterpreted if you became incapacitated. Dr. Nicolette's voice was tight with controlled fury. "These are not the questions of a husband hoping for recovery." The room seemed to tilt around me, the hospital walls suddenly too close, too confining. All this time, I'd been fighting cancer, with everything I had, clinging to the belief that Orlando was my partner in this battle. Instead, he'd been preparing for a future without me. No, actively working toward one. "What do we do?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Dr. Nicolette leaned forward. "First, we protect you, medically and legally. Then, we gather evidence. And Rosalie?" Her gaze locked with mine, fierce with determination. "We make sure you survive. both the cancer and him. My initial challenge wasn't confronting Orlando, it was confronting myself. The woman I had been before cancer, before betrayal, seemed impossibly distant now. Professor Rosalie Bennett, respected scholar who lectured confidently to hundreds of students, who navigated academic politics with strategic precision, who stood her ground in intellectual debates, where was she now? Could I find her beneath the frail patient with hollow cheeks and a scarf wrapped around her bare scalp? "We need to be strategic," Dr. Nicolette advised during our first planning session, the morning after she'd shown me the videos. Claudine had brought legal pads and pens, placing them on my hospital tray with the solemnity of weapons being distributed. "Before battle. Orlando believes you're completely focused on your treatment, unaware of his activities. That's our advantage. Pretend everything is normal," Claudine added, her kind eyes now sharp with purpose. "Let him think his secret is safe." I stared at the blank page before me, pen hovering uselessly above it. I don't know if I can. When I think about him touching her in our bed, going through my personal papers, talking to financial advisors, about my pension. My hand trembled, spilling drops of ink onto the pristine white surface. "Then don't think about it," Dr. Nicolette said firmly. "Compartmentalize. It's what surgeons do during difficult operations. Focus only on the task at hand. Everything else is background noise." "I'm not a surgeon," I whispered. "I'm a literature professor who specializes in stories where the betrayed wife usually dies tragically or gets locked in a tower." A ghost of a smile touched Dr. Nicolette's lips. "But you're also an expert on how those women fight back, aren't you? The subtle ways they exercise power even when society gives them none?" She was right. My entire academic career had focused on uncovering the hidden agency of medieval women in literature, the ways they navigated patriarchal constraints, the strategies they employed when direct confrontation wasn't possible. Morgan Le Fay, Guinevere, Isolde. They hadn't simply accepted their fates, they'd rewritten them through cunning, patience, and carefully concealed strength. "First, we secure your legal position," Dr. Nicolette continued. "We need to ensure Orlando can't make medical decisions for you if your condition changes." "I'll contact Lenny Goldstein," I said, the name of my university's legal counsel coming to mind. "He helped draft my original will and healthcare directives. I trust him." "Doctor," Nicolette nodded. "Good, but use my phone, not yours. We can't risk Orlando seeing the call on your records." The realization that I needed to treat my husband as an adversary, a potential threat to my very survival, was the first real challenge, a psychological hurdle higher than any physical obstacle cancer had placed in my path. The man who had held my hair during the first rounds of violent chemo-induced vomiting was the same man plotting my erasure. Both realities existed simultaneously, and reconciling them required a mental discipline I wasn't sure I possessed. Lenny arrived that afternoon, his rumpled suit and perpetually askew tie a comforting familiarity in my increasingly unfamiliar world. At 62, he'd seen enough of life's uglier aspects to take my situation in stride, though the flash of anger in his eyes when Dr. Nicolette showed him the videos told me this betrayal had pierced even his professional veneer. "We'll revoke Orlando's medical power of attorney immediately," he said, pulling documents from his battered leather briefcase, "and file restraining orders against any financial institution where you hold joint accounts. He won't be able to touch your pension or research grants." "What about the house?" I asked, the thought of Emma sleeping in my bedroom, using my shower, sitting at my writing desk making me physically ill. "Jointly owned, which complicates things," Lenny admitted. "But we can file an emergency petition preventing sale or transfer without your explicit consent. And we'll place your personal property, especially your research materials, under legal protection." As Lenny worked through the legal forms with me, explaining each document in careful detail, Orlando texted to say he'd be working late again. The casual deception, once so carefully hidden, now seemed insultingly transparent. "Send something supportive back," Dr. Nicolette advised, reading the message over my shoulder. Remember, we want him complacent, unsuspecting. My fingers hovered over the phone screen, revulsion coursing through me at the thought of pretending, of playing along with his fiction. But I forced myself to type. No problem. Doctors want me to stay another night anyway. Rest well. The heart emoji nearly broke me, a symbol of affection sent to a man who was systematically destroying everything. We'd built, but it was necessary, strategic. The first move in what would become an elaborate chess match. The most dangerous time will be when he realizes you're onto him, Lenny warned as he gathered his paperwork. Men like Orlando, academics especially, have fragile egos wrapped in intellectual armor. When that armor cracks, the reaction can be unpredictable. Which is why we're installing additional security measures, Dr. Nicolette added, both here at the hospital and at your home. I can't. Go back there, I said. The thought of returning to the house Orlando had defiled with Emma sending panic through me. Not while they're... I couldn't finish the sentence. You won't have to, Claudine assured me. We've arranged for a recovery apartment at the hospital's supportive care facility. It's where doctors stay during extended rotations, fully furnished, equipped for medical needs, and most importantly, secure. The practical considerations kept mounting, changing passwords on my email and academic accounts, securing my research data, alerting trusted colleagues to watch for unusual requests from Orlando regarding my classes and committee positions. Each step was logical, necessary, and exhausting. By evening, my room had become a command center of sorts. Dr. Nicolette's tablet continuously displayed feeds from the cameras in my home, allowing us to monitor Orlando's activities. Claudine had brought in secure storage for the growing stack of legal documents. Lenny had stationed one of his paralegals in the hospital lobby, ready to file emergency motions if Orlando made any sudden financial moves. He's home, Claudine announced around 8, nodding toward the tablet where Orlando could be seen entering our house alone. His briefcase and jacket dropped carelessly on the entryway bench I'd refinished myself years ago. We watched in silence as he moved through the house, checking his watch, straightening things with the nervous energy of someone expecting company. At 8:37, Emma arrived, letting herself in with what was clearly her own key. They embraced in the foyer, their comfortable familiarity a knife twisting in my chest. Turn it off, I said, unable to watch their domestic intimacy play out in my space, with my things surrounding them. I can't. Not tonight. Dr. Nicolette nodded, switching the tablet's display to medical charts instead, a clinical refuge from emotional turmoil. You need rest, Rosalie. Tomorrow will be challenging enough. She was right. Orlando had texted that he'd visit around noon, his first appearance in 3 days. I would need to face him, to look into the eyes of the man I'd loved for 15 years while knowing he was actively preparing for my death. I would need to smile, to ask about his work, to pretend I remained blissfully ignorant of his betrayal. It would be the performance of my life, far more difficult than any academic lecture or conference presentation. And unlike those professional challenges, the stakes here couldn't be higher. My very survival depended on my ability to play the role of the unsuspecting, declining patient. As I drifted into uneasy sleep that night, my mind returned to Guinevere, to Morgan Le Fay, to all the women in medieval literature who had worn masks of compliance while orchestrating their own salvation. Their stories, which I had studied and taught for decades, were no longer academic exercises. They were blueprints for survival, and I would need every lesson they offered in the battle that lay ahead. The morning Orlando was scheduled to visit, Dr. Nicolette arrived early with news that shifted the terrain of our battle entirely. We've found something concerning, she said, her voice measured in that particular way doctors use when delivering difficult information. She placed her tablet on my bed tray and pulled up what looked like pharmaceutical records. These are your medication logs from the week's UI. were home between hospital stays. I stared at the charts, my academic mind automatically searching for patterns in the data. What am I looking for? Discrepancies, Dr. Nicolette said, pointing to several highlighted entries. According to our dispensary records, Orlando picked up your full prescription of pain management medication every week. Standard protocol for cancer patients on your treatment regimen. That's right, I confirmed. He kept them in the kitchen cabinet, measured out the doses himself. I'd been grateful for his careful attention, for the way he'd wake even in the middle of the night to ensure I received medication on schedule. The problem, Dr. Nicolette continued, is that your blood work consistently showed lower than expected levels of these medications in your system. Not just slightly lower, significantly so. Claudine, who had entered silently during our conversation, added, "We initially attributed it to metabolic variations. Some patients process medications differently, especially during chemotherapy." "But?" I prompted, sensing the unspoken conclusion. "But we analyzed the pill bottles Orlando returned when you were readmitted for your infection," Dr. Nicolette said quietly. "The medications had been tampered with. Many of the capsules contained only partial doses. Others had been replaced entirely with inert substances." The implication crashed over me like a physical blow. "Are you saying Orlando was diluting my medication? Deliberately?" "We can't prove intent yet," Dr. Nicolette cautioned. "But the evidence is difficult to interpret any other way. The tampering was systematic, not accidental." "Why would he?" I began, then stopped as the terrible logic assembled itself in my mind. The infection. My readmission to the hospital. He was creating opportunities. Dr. Nicolette nodded grimly. "By keeping your pain unmanaged, he ensured your condition would deteriorate. Pain stresses the body, compromises the immune system, makes complications more likely. And complications create decision points where, as your medical proxy, he could influence your treatment path. Or choose to end it," I whispered, the full horror of the situation crystallizing. This wasn't just betrayal or abandonment. This was something far more calculated, more sinister. "We've altered your medication protocols," Claudine assured me. "All your prescriptions now come directly from the hospital pharmacy to the nursing station. Nothing passes through Orlando's hands." The stakes had escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. Not just my marriage, my home, my academic position, but my very survival was now in question. Orlando wasn't simply waiting for cancer to create a convenient widowhood. He was actively creating conditions to hasten my decline. "There's more," Dr. Nicolette said, swiping to a new screen on her tablet. "We recovered deleted searches from the home computer system. Orlando has been researching undetectable poisons, drug interactions that could trigger cardiac events, and ways to mimic natural cancer progression." My stomach lurched violently, bile rising in my throat. Claudine quickly passed me a basin, her practiced movements suggesting she'd anticipated this reaction. As I heaved, emptying my already hollow stomach, the physical purging seemed to mirror the psychological expulsion of everything I'd believed about my marriage. When I could speak again, my voice was raw, but steadier than I expected. "He wants me dead." The words hung in the sterile hospital air, their stark simplicity belying the complex betrayal they represented. My husband of 15 years, the man who had promised to cherish me in sickness and in health, was researching ways to kill me while making it appear natural. "We need to involve law enforcement," Lenny said, having entered during my moment of distress. "This goes beyond civil protection now. This is attempted murder." "Not yet," I said, surprising even myself with the clarity of my decision. "If we bring in police now, Orlando will know we're onto him. He'll cover his tracks, destroy evidence. We need to build an airtight case first." Dr. Nicolette studied me with newfound respect. "You're thinking like a prosecutor." "I'm thinking like a medieval queen," I corrected, drawing on the strength of the women I'd studied for decades. When direct confrontation meant certain defeat, they learned to maneuver differently. "Rosalie," Lenny cautioned, "this isn't an academic exercise. Your life is literally at risk." "Which is exactly why we need to be strategic," I insisted. "Orlando is coming here in 2 hours. If we confront him now, we lose our advantage. The element of surprise, the opportunity to gather more evidence, the chance to understand the full scope of his plan." A tense silence filled the room as my improvised council of protectors considered the risk I was proposing to take. I could see the conflict in their faces, the professional instinct to report a clear threat battling with the strategic logic of my position. "We can establish additional safeguards," Dr. Nicolette finally conceded. "No medications or food from outside sources, limited physical contact, hospital security discreetly present during his visits. And we accelerate our evidence gathering," Claudine added. "The cameras are already documenting everything at your house. We can have your office at the university secured as well." Lenny still looked troubled. "At the first sign of direct threat, we go to the police. No debates, no strategic considerations. Your safety comes first." I nodded, acknowledging the reasonable boundary. "Agreed. But for now, we let Orlando believe his plan is working. That I'm getting weaker, more dependent, less aware." "Speaking of which," Dr. Nicolette said, checking her watch, "we need to prepare you for his visit. If you're going to play the role of the unsuspecting patient, we need to make it convincing." The next hour transformed my hospital room into something like a theater dressing room. Claudine adjusted my appearance to enhance the impression of illness, arranging my headscarf to emphasize my pallor, positioning my IV prominently, slightly smudging dark circles under my eyes. Dr. Nicolette coached me on my performance. Your response is delayed, slightly confused. Cancer patients undergoing intensive chemotherapy often experience chemo brain, cognitive fogginess, memory lapses. Orlando will expect this." "Let him lead the conversation," Claudine advised. "The less you say, the less chance of revealing something accidentally." As noon approached, they placed hidden recording devices around my room, tiny microphones disguised as medical equipment. A camera concealed in the television monitor, another in the wall clock. Every word, every gesture Orlando made would be captured and preserved as evidence. "Remember," Dr. Nicolette said before taking her position at the nurse's station where she could monitor the feed, "you're not just fighting cancer now. You're fighting a predator who believes you're already defeated. Use that underestimation to your advantage." At precisely 12:08, Orlando arrived, knocking softly before entering with a practiced expression of concerned devotion. He carried flowers, lilies, my favorite, and a canvas bag that presumably contained books or personal items. The sight of him, so familiar yet now so dangerous, nearly shattered my composure. "Rosalie," he said, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine affection. "You look better today." He leaned in to kiss my forehead, and it took everything I had not to recoil from his touch. "Do I?" I murmured, intentionally slurring my words slightly. "They changed my medications again. Everything feels fuzzy. A flicker of something, calculation, satisfaction, crossed his features so quickly I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching for it. "That's normal, sweetheart. Your body is adjusting." As he settled into the chair beside my bed, taking my hand in his with the tender gesture of a loving husband, I realized the true challenge wasn't just staying alive. It was maintaining this performance of ignorance while knowing that the fingers, intertwined with mine, had tried to engineer my death, and would likely try again. The stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just about surviving cancer anymore. This was about outliving Orlando's deadly patience. Orlando's visit that day revealed layers of his deception I hadn't fully comprehended before. With my newly attuned awareness, I began to see the architecture of his betrayal. Not just what he was doing, but who he truly was beneath the facade of devoted husband. "I spoke with Dr. Nicolette about your treatment plan," he said, settling into the visitor's chair with the easy confidence of someone who belongs there. "She mentioned they're considering reducing your chemotherapy intensity because your body isn't responding as well as they'd hoped." My heart rate spiked, though I was careful to keep my expression neutral. Dr. Nicolette had said no such thing. In fact, quite the opposite. My latest scans showed continued tumor reduction. This was Orlando's first lie of the visit, testing. "The waters. Is that what she said?" I murmured, feigning mild confusion. "Everything's so hard to keep straight these days." Orlando patted my hand sympathetically. "It's the medication, sweetheart. Don't worry about remembering all the medical details. That's what I'm here for." The condescension in his tone was something I might once have overlooked or excused. Now, it stood out starkly, the subtle positioning of himself as the competent caretaker, the diminishment of my capacity to understand my own condition. "The department sends their love," he continued, smoothly changing subjects. "Everyone's been asking about you. Dean Mitchell specifically mentioned how they're handling your teaching load for next semester, making contingency plans." Another lie wrapped in plausibility. Through Lenny, I'd already confirmed that my department had approved medical leave, but was holding my courses for my expected return. No contingency plans had been discussed. Orlando was systematically creating a narrative of my professional decline to parallel my physical one. "That's thoughtful," I managed, swallowing the bitter taste of anger. "My students? Assigned to other advisors for now?" Orlando said casually. "Just temporarily, of course. Though some of your doctoral candidates, Emma for instance, have requested permanent reassignment. They're concerned about delays affecting their graduation timeline." The mention of Emma's name was deliberate, I realized. A small cruelty, inserting his lover into our conversation while pretending she was merely a concerned student, testing whether I suspected anything. I closed my eyes briefly, using the gesture to mask my reaction. "That makes sense," I said softly. "Their careers shouldn't be derailed by my situation." Throughout the hour-long visit, I watched Orlando, with new clarity, cataloging the components of his character that had assembled into this betrayal. His careful attention to my medical details wasn't compassion, but surveillance, monitoring for signs of improvement that might threaten his plans. His gentle reminiscing about our past wasn't nostalgia, but reinforcement of a narrative he was constructing. The tragic love story of a devoted husband losing his brilliant wife to illness. Most revealing were the subtle ways he undermined my agency, interrupting when I tried to ask questions about my treatment, dismissively explaining away my occasional moments of clarity as good days that shouldn't be overinterpreted, repeatedly emphasizing to the nurse who came to check my vitals how confused I'd been lately. "I've been going through some of your research notes," he mentioned near the end of his visit, his tone casual, but his eyes watchful, "to make sure nothing important gets lost in case your recovery takes longer than we hope. I was thinking I could help organize them, maybe even continue some of your projects if necessary." The true purpose of this statement was clear. He was testing whether I would object to his appropriation of my life's work. What he didn't know was that Lenny had already secured my intellectual property, filing emergency copyright protections, and removing critical research materials to a secure location. "That's so thoughtful," I whispered, injecting admiration into my voice while my stomach churned with disgust. "No one understands my work like you do." His smile in response was genuine, the smile of a predator who believes his prey is willingly walking into his trap. After Orlando left, promising to return the following day with more books and personal items, I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. The strain of maintaining my performance, of suppressing my natural reactions to his manipulations, had exacted a physical toll. Dr. Nicolette found me there, trembling on the cold tile floor, and helped me back to bed without comment or judgment. Only when I was settled did she speak. "You did remarkably well," she said, checking the monitoring equipment that had captured every moment of Orlando's visit. "We got everything. The lies about your treatment plan, the misrepresentations about your department's decisions, the attempts to isolate you professionally." "Did you see how he watched me?" I asked, still shaking slightly from the aftermath of adrenaline. Calculating, measuring every response, like I was a specimen under observation. "I saw," she confirmed grimly. "This isn't new behavior for him, Rosalie. What we witnessed today isn't a sudden betrayal prompted by your illness. This is who he's always been, just revealed more clearly by circumstances." Her observation struck me with the force of revelation. Dr. Nicolette was right. Orlando hadn't transformed from loving husband to calculating predator overnight. The seeds of this betrayal had always been present, carefully concealed beneath charm and intellectual compatibility. I thought back to our 15 years together with new clarity. The subtle ways Orlando had isolated me from certain friends. His strategic interventions in my career, supportive on the surface but often directing me away from opportunities that might have separated us or elevated me too far above him professionally. His insistence on joint financial accounts that he primarily managed. "He's always controlled the narrative," I said slowly, the pattern emerging with terrible clarity. Presenting himself as the supportive husband, the devoted partner, all while subtly ensuring he maintained dominance in ways I never fully recognized. Dr. Nicolette nodded. "Classic narcissistic behavior. Your diagnosis threatened his carefully constructed world in two ways. It directed attention away from him, and it presented the possibility of your increased dependence, which would require genuine selflessness he doesn't possess. So he found a solution that turned my illness to his advantage," I concluded. "Emma provides the attention and admiration he craves, while my conveniently anticipated death would give him sympathy, financial benefits, and even access to my professional legacy." Claudine entered with the afternoon medication round, having reviewed the recording of Orlando's visit from the nurse's station. "He mentioned bringing more of your things tomorrow," she said, concern evident in her voice. "Could he be removing evidence from your home? Covering his tracks?" "Absolutely," I confirmed. "The way he emphasized organizing my research notes, he's sanitizing my professional materials, probably removing anything that would contradict his narrative about continuing my work." "We need to accelerate our timeline," Dr. Nicolette decided. "Lenny has the emergency filings prepared for your intellectual property and financial protections. We should submit them today." I nodded agreement, feeling strangely calm now that I fully understood who and what we were fighting. Orlando was not an ordinary betrayer, not simply a husband who had strayed during a difficult time. He was a calculated predator who had been hiding in plain sight throughout our marriage, waiting for the perfect opportunity to consume what he'd always considered rightfully his: my career, my resources, my very identity. "There's something else we need to consider," I said, the academic part of my mind automatically analyzing patterns and projecting outcomes. "If Orlando realizes his current approach isn't working, that I'm not declining as rapidly as he hoped, he might accelerate his own timeline. Become more direct." Dr. Nicolette's expression hardened. "You mean attempt something more immediately fatal than medication tampering?" "Exactly. Everything we've seen suggests Orlando values the appearance of propriety, the narrative of the grieving husband. But if that narrative is threatened, we increase security immediately," Dr. Nicolette decided. "No visitors without prior approval and screening. All food and personal items inspected. And we begin preparations to move you to the secure recovery facility earlier than planned." As they outlined increased protection measures, I realized I was no longer shocked by the depths of Orlando's betrayal. Understanding the true nature of my antagonist had replaced horror with clarity, confusion with purpose. For 15 years, I had loved and lived with a carefully constructed fiction, a man who existed primarily in my perception rather than in reality. Now that the illusion had shattered, I could finally see the true battle before me. This wasn't just about surviving cancer or exposing infidelity. This was about reclaiming my narrative from someone who had been subtly rewriting it all along. My hospital room transformed into a war room over the next 48 hours. What had begun as a small circle of three, Dr. Nicolette, Claudine, and myself, expanded into a carefully assembled alliance of protectors, each bringing unique skills to our increasingly complex campaign. Joel Martinez, the hospital's head of security, joined our coalition after reviewing the evidence of Orlando's medication tampering. A former police detective with 20 years of experience, Joel's calm demeanor belied our razor-sharp tactical mind. "Your husband's creating a pattern," he observed, studying the timeline we'd assembled on Dr. Nicolette's tablet. Regular visits, increasing attempts to insert himself into medical decisions, building a public persona as the devoted caretaker. Classic groundwork for what we used to call the grieving widow defense. "Widower," I corrected automatically, my academic precision asserting itself even in these circumstances. Joel's smile was grim. "Not if we do our jobs right." He implemented an invisible security protocol, guards dressed as orderlies positioned near my room, surveillance equipment monitoring all approaches to my floor, background checks on every staff member who might have access to my medication or food. The protection was comprehensive but subtle, nothing that would alert Orlando that his movements were being tracked. Dr. Nicolette expanded our medical team to include Dr. Rashid Khan, an oncologist from another hospital system whose expertise in my particular cancer variant provided both additional treatment options and, crucially, a medical authority completely outside Orlando's sphere of influence. "Your response to treatment is actually remarkable," Dr. Khan told me during our first consultation, reviewing my charts with evident approval. "Based on these markers, I'd place you firmly in the positive response category. Whoever suggested reducing your treatment intensity was either incompetent or had motivations unrelated to your medical welfare." Having an external medical expert document Orlando's misrepresentations about my prognosis added another layer to our growing case. Perhaps most surprising was the emergence of Emma's roommate, Claudine's cousin Audrey, as an unexpected ally. Audrey had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Emma's secretive behavior and mysterious work meetings that often lasted all night. "She thinks I don't know she's sleeping with her professor," Audrey told Claudine during a recorded call we all reviewed. "But she left her laptop open last week and I saw emails between them. They're not just having an affair, they're planning some kind of future together that depends on his wife being out of the picture." Through Audrey, we gained invaluable intelligence about Emma's movements and, by extension, Orlando's plans when he wasn't at the hospital. Emma, it seemed, was not merely a mistress, but an active conspirator, helping Orlando transfer research materials, rearrange finances, and construct the narrative that would eventually cast him as both victim and heir to my academic legacy. My department chair, Sylvia Mitchell, became another critical ally when Lenny cautiously approached her with carefully selected evidence of Orlando's academic misconduct. Without revealing the full scope of our investigation, Lenny presented enough documentation to demonstrate that Orlando had been systematically positioning himself to appropriate my research and scholarly identity. "I've had concerns about Orlando's behavior since your diagnosis," Sylvia admitted during a secure video call from my hospital room. "He's been making strange inquiries about your contract status, your intellectual property rights, even attempting to access your university email account on your behalf." I denied his requests, of course, but couldn't articulate why they felt inappropriate. With Sylvia's help, my professional position was secured. The university placed administrative holds on my academic accounts, ensuring Orlando couldn't access or alter my teaching materials, research files, or professional correspondence. My graduate students were officially reassigned to other advisors, but not to Orlando, breaking his direct influence over their work. This growing network of protectors created a protective barrier around me that extended far beyond the hospital walls. My life, medical, professional, legal, financial, was being systematically secured against Orlando's intrusions, each sector now guarded by experts who understood the threat he posed. But the most important alliance was the one forming within me. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt my strength returning. Not just physically, as the treatment continued to shrink my tumors, but emotionally and intellectually as well. The fog of betrayal was lifting, replaced by a clarity of purpose that energized me despite the ongoing rigors of chemotherapy. "You seem stronger today," Dr. Nicolette observed, checking my vitals with professional efficiency that couldn't quite mask her personal concern. "I am stronger," I confirmed. When I thought Orlando was fighting alongside me, I was dividing my energy, battling cancer while also worrying about him, trying to protect him from the difficulty of watching me suffer. "Now I know exactly where to direct all my strength." Joel, reviewing security footage from the previous day's visit, nodded in approval. "Your performance was perfect. He has no idea you're onto him." Medieval queens were often required to smile at men who plotted against them, I said, drawing on my academic expertise in a way that now felt personal rather than theoretical. "Survival sometimes depended on appearing weaker than you were." As our alliance grew stronger and more coordinated, I recognized that Orlando's greatest miscalculation had been in choosing me as his target. He had selected me precisely because he believed my illness made me vulnerable, isolated, and dependent. Instead, it had surrounded me with protectors who would never have entered my life otherwise. Medical professionals, security experts, legal advocates, all now focused on ensuring not just my survival, but his exposure. Cancer had not weakened me. It had revealed my true strength and brought me allies Orlando could never have anticipated. 3 weeks into our covert operation, Orlando gave us what appeared to be our first major victory. The opportunity arrived unexpectedly during his Tuesday afternoon visit, a visit he'd nearly canceled due to departmental obligations, but then suddenly prioritized after Dr. Nicolette mentioned my improved blood work during a routine update call. "I've been thinking about your comfort," Orlando announced, settling into the visitor's chair with unusual formality. He placed his leather messenger bag, the one I'd given him for our 10th anniversary, carefully on the floor beside him. "About making things easier for both of us during this difficult time." I maintained my practiced expression of mild confusion tinged with appreciation, though internal alarms immediately began ringing. Orlando's thoughtfulness had proven to be the prelude to his most calculated moves. "That's sweet," I murmured, deliberately slurring the word slightly, perpetuating the impression of medication-induced fog that had become my most effective camouflage. "I've brought some papers for you to sign," he continued, extracting a manila folder from his bag. "Nothing complicated, just updates to your advance directives, power of attorney refinements. Standard recommendations from the hospital's patient advocacy office." This last claim was a bold lie. No such recommendations had been made, and Orlando had carefully avoided any contact with the actual patient advocacy department, knowing they would prioritize my interests over his. "Dr. Nicolette mentioned you're having more difficulty with writing and comprehension," he added, uncapping an expensive fountain pen, another gift from me years ago. "So I've marked everything with simple X's where you need to sign. Don't worry about reading through it all. I've reviewed everything with our family attorney." We had no family attorney. This fabrication was meant to provide false reassurance, to suggest external oversight where none existed. I took the pen with trembling fingers, a tremor that was only partially performance. Even knowing what Orlando was attempting, even prepared for his manipulations, the casual cruelty of his deception still held power to wound. "What's this for again?" I asked, allowing confusion to dominate my expression as I peered vaguely at the documents. Just updates, Orlando repeated, his patience visibly strained despite his controlled tone. Medical decisions, financial matters, things we need to have in order given your situation. I let the pen hover uncertainly over the signature line, using the moment to glance toward the door where I knew Claudine was positioned, monitoring our interaction. A tiny nod confirmed that our plan was proceeding. Lenny was in the building. Joel's security team was recording everything, and Dr. Nicolette was standing by. Should we wait for Dr. Nicolette? I suggested mildly. She usually explains medical things to me. A flash of irritation crossed Orlando's features before he smoothed them into concerned patience. This isn't medical, Rosalie. It's administrative. Dr. Nicolette's very busy with other patients. We shouldn't bother her with paperwork. I allowed my hand to drift down toward the signature line, the pen making contact with the paper without actually signing. I just feel foggy today. Maybe tomorrow would be better? Orlando's composure slipped further, revealing the urgency beneath his casual presentation. It really needs to be today, sweetheart. These authorizations are time-sensitive for your treatment. Plan! Another lie. No treatment changes were pending that required immediate authorization. Well, if you think it's important, I began, deliberately trailing off as I made a show of attempting to sign my name, the pen creating an illegible scrawl that wandered off the signature line. Orlando suppressed a wince at my apparent deterioration, but couldn't entirely hide his satisfaction at this evidence of my declining capabilities. He quickly flipped to the next page, pointing to another signature line with unconcealed eagerness. Just one more here, he urged. Then we're all set. As I raised the pen again, the door opened with perfect timing. Dr. Nicolette entered, followed by Lenny Goldstein, both wearing expressions of professional concern. Ms. Bennett, Lenny said formally, I'm glad I caught you before any documents were executed. There seems to be some confusion about legal paperwork being presented to you. Orlando's head snapped up, surprise quickly replaced by controlled affability. No confusion, just routine updates to Rosalie's directives, nothing that concerns the hospital's legal department. Mr. Goldstein isn't hospital legal, Dr. Nicolette corrected coolly. He's Ms. Bennett's personal attorney, and any changes to a patient's legal documents absolutely concern me as her physician. Orlando's expression hardened momentarily before he manufactured a convincing look of embarrassed contrition. I should have coordinated better. Rosalie and I discussed these updates weeks ago, before her cognitive functions began declining more rapidly. He turned to me with practiced tenderness. Remember, sweetheart, we talked about consolidating financial decisions to make things easier during your treatment? Another lie. Carefully constructed to suggest prior consent now forgotten due to illness. I have no record of such discussions, Lenny stated, reaching for the document folder with professional authority. And as Ms. Bennett's legal representative, I'll need to review any proposed changes before she considers signing. A tense silence filled the room as Orlando calculated his options. Direct opposition would reveal his true intentions, while acquiescence would delay his plans. After a moment of visible internal struggle, he opted for strategic retreat. Of course, he said smoothly, releasing the folder to Lenny with manufactured graciousness. I only want what's best for Rosalie. Perhaps we can all review these together, when she's having a clearer day. This apparent capitulation, this willingness to operate within proper protocols, created the illusion of a significant victory. Orlando had been prevented from obtaining fraudulent signatures, had been confronted with unexpected opposition, and had seemingly accepted these new boundaries. As he left shortly afterward, making excuses about a faculty meeting, the atmosphere in my room lightened considerably. We caught him red-handed, Claudine said, entering after confirming Orlando had left the floor. Those documents would have given him complete control over your medical decisions and financial assets. And we have it all on record, Joel added. indicating the cameras that had captured every moment of the interaction. His misrepresentations, the attempted fraud, everything. Their satisfaction was understandable. We had successfully thwarted a significant threat. But as Lenny examined the documents Orlando had brought, his expression grew increasingly grave. "This isn't just bad," he said quietly. "It's potentially criminal. These aren't standard advance directives. These are authorizations for experimental treatments, liability waivers, and financial power transfers that go far beyond normal medical proxies." Dr. Nicolette looked over his shoulder, her medical expertise allowing her to understand the implications immediately. "These would have given him authority to enroll you in experimental protocols without oversight from your established medical team." The temporary triumph of preventing Orlando from obtaining my signature suddenly felt hollow. What we had witnessed wasn't just an attempt at financial control, it was potentially groundwork for something far more sinister. "He'll try again," I said with certainty, the false victory evaporating in the face of this new understanding. "And next time, he'll be more prepared for resistance." The false victory over Orlando's documentation scheme lasted exactly 47 hours. Then came the setback. Sudden, devastating, and nearly fatal. It began with a text message from Orlando explaining he couldn't visit that day. An emergency department meeting required his attention. This wasn't unusual. His visits had become increasingly sporadic, as my covert resistance made them less productive for his purposes. What we didn't realize was that his absence was strategic rather than coincidental. The first indication of trouble came during my afternoon treatment. I had just settled into the chemotherapy suite, IV line established, when an unfamiliar nurse approached with a medication bag. "New protocol today," she explained cheerfully, checking my wristband against her chart. "Dr. Bernard approved the adjustment this morning." Something in her phrasing triggered my suspicion. Dr. Nicolette was always referred to as Dr. Nicolette throughout the hospital, never as Dr. Bernard. This minor discrepancy, combined with the unexpected protocol change, sent alarm signals through my mind. "Could you double-check that with my primary team?" I asked, keeping my voice casual despite the adrenaline suddenly coursing through my system. I think Dr. Nicolette wanted to discuss any changes with me first. The nurse, her badge read Melissa, seemed momentarily flustered. "It's right here in your chart. Signed and everything." "I understand," I said, offering an apologetic smile. "But I'm a bit of a control freak about my treatment. Academic habits die hard." This gentle self-deprecation worked where outright refusal might have raised suspicions. Melissa nodded with professional understanding. "No problem. I'll verify before we proceed." She stepped away to the nursing station, and I immediately texted Claudine using the secure phone our team had provided. My message was brief. "Unfamiliar nurse. Unauthorized medication change. Suite 4. Claudine's response was immediate. A thumbs up. Emoji indicating she'd received the alert and action was being taken. Less than 2 minutes later, Dr. Nicolette appeared at the suite entrance, her expression neutral, but her eyes scanning the situation with laser focus. "There seems to be some confusion about Ms. Bennett's treatment protocol," she said smoothly, approaching Melissa at the medication station. "I don't recall authorizing any changes today." Melissa looked confused, pulling up the electronic chart on her tablet. "It's right here, doctor. Signed by you at 9:17 this morning. Order for supplemental protocol P435. Dr. Nicolette's face remained professionally composed, but I caught the momentary stiffening of her shoulders, a telling reaction for someone familiar with her body language. Whatever protocol P435 was, it wasn't standard cancer treatment. "Let me see that," Dr. Nicolette said, taking the tablet and studying it intently. After a moment, she handed it back with a reassuring smile. "There's been a mix-up. This order was intended for another patient. Thank you for double-checking before administration." She smoothly redirected Melissa to continue my standard protocol, then came to sit beside me as the proper medication began, flowing into my veins. "What was it?" I asked quietly, once Melissa was out of earshot. "A powerful immunosuppressant," Dr. Nicolette replied, her voice barely audible. "Not chemotherapy at all. Something that would have drastically compromised your immune system while providing no therapeutic benefit for your cancer." The implications were chilling. My condition was improving. My body was responding to treatment. An immunosuppressant would have reversed that progress, creating the very decline Orlando had been falsely reporting. "How did he get access to order entry?" I whispered, acutely aware of how close we'd come to disaster. "He didn't," Dr. Nicolette said grimly. "Someone with legitimate system access did this. The order appears authentic. It has all the proper authorization codes." The realization hit us simultaneously. Orlando had an accomplice within the hospital system, someone with medical credentials and system access. Our carefully constructed security had been compromised. Within an hour, Joel Martinez had the oncology department's computer systems locked down for a security audit. Dr. Rashid Khan was called in to personally oversee my treatment, and Claudine established round-the-clock observation of my room. But the damage to our sense of security was already done. "We need to move you immediately," Joel insisted during an emergency meeting in my room that evening. "This facility is compromised," Lenny concurred, his normally rumpled appearance even more disheveled by stress. "Whoever falsified that order has access to hospital systems. They could alter your medication, your test results, your entire medical record." Dr. Nicolette, who had been reviewing security logs on her tablet, looked up with grim determination. "The order was entered using Dr. Amanda Chen's credentials, but she was in surgery at the exact time of entry. Someone used her login while she was unavailable to confirm or deny." "Any idea who?" Joel asked. "Several possibilities," Dr. Nicolette admitted. "At least 12 staff members would have witnessed her logging in this morning and could have accessed her workstation while she was in surgery. The setback was devastating precisely because it revealed the limits of our precautions. We had secured my room, my medication, my legal status, but we hadn't anticipated infiltration of the hospital's systems themselves. We can't trust this environment anymore," Dr. Nicolette concluded. "Not when we don't know who the accomplice is." "But moving me makes me vulnerable in transit," I pointed out. "And Orlando will be notified of any transfer. Hospital policy requires spousal notification." "Not if it's classified as an emergency security transfer," Joel countered. "We have enough evidence of potential harm to justify protective protocols." Even as they debated logistics, another blow landed. My phone buzzed with a notification from the university's administrative system, an automatically generated email confirming my voluntary medical retirement, effective immediately. Somehow, Orlando had gained enough authorization to initiate my separation from the university. "Check my pension," I said urgently to Lenny. "If he's processed my retirement, he'll try to access my benefits next." Lenny was already dialing his paralegal. "On it. We placed blocks, but if he had university authorization codes..." The hits continued throughout the evening. Orlando had systematically exploited our focus on hospital security to make moves in other arenas. My department email had been disabled. My research access revoked under the pretext of medical leave requirements. My office was being temporarily reassigned due to space constraints. Most concerning was the discovery that Orlando had scheduled movers to begin consolidating our household the following week, essentially emptying our home of my possessions while I remained hospitalized. "He's erasing you systematically," Claudine observed, the blunt assessment painful but accurate. "Professionally, financially, physically." The setback wasn't just in hospital security. It was the revelation that Orlando's plan was more comprehensive, more multifaceted than we had anticipated. While we had focused on protecting my medical treatment and legal status, He had been working to dismantle my entire existence, my professional identity, my home, my place in the world. As our team scrambled to counter these new threats, I faced the sobering reality that we had underestimated our opponent. Orlando wasn't just trying to hasten my death. He was ensuring that even if I survived, I would have nothing left to return to. The sense of violation was profound, the setback severe. For the first time since discovering Orlando's betrayal, I felt the full weight of despair pressing down on me. In the aftermath of Orlando's coordinated assault on my life, Dr. Nicolette made the decision to relocate me to the secure recovery facility immediately. The transfer occurred at 3:17 a.m., executed with military precision under Joel's supervision, with decoy transports leaving the hospital at regular intervals to confuse any potential observers. My new accommodations resembled an upscale apartment, more than a hospital room, with comfortable furnishings, natural light, and enhanced security features subtly integrated into the design. Medical equipment was discreetly positioned, creating an environment that felt more like a refuge than a treatment center. Once the immediate crisis of relocation had passed, once the new security protocols were established and confirmed, once my team had countered Orlando's most pressing attacks on my professional and financial existence, I found myself alone with thoughts I could no longer outrun. The quiet of that first night in the recovery apartment created space for a reckoning I had been avoiding, a critical reflection not just on Orlando's betrayal, but on my own role in our shared narrative. I sat by the window overlooking the hospital's central courtyard, wrapped in a cashmere throw Claudine had brought from her own home, and forced myself to confront uncomfortable truths. How had I missed the signs? How had I, an expert in analyzing medieval literature for subtextual power dynamics, failed to recognize the manipulation occurring in my own marriage? What had allowed Orlando to operate so effectively, so completely beneath my awareness? The pattern stretched back further than I wanted to admit. Orlando's controlling tendencies hadn't emerged suddenly with my cancer diagnosis. They had been present all along, disguised as care, as support, as partnership. I remembered how he had subtly discouraged certain friendships over the years, colleagues he deemed too negative or politically complicated, how research opportunities that might have separated us geographically were always discussed in terms of their impact on our shared goals, rather than my individual career advancement. How financial decisions inevitably bent toward his preferences after exhausting deliberations that left me too drained to maintain opposition. None of these behaviors had seemed controlling in isolation. Each could be rationalized, explained away as the natural compromises of marriage. But viewed collectively, in the harsh light of his ultimate betrayal, they formed a clear pattern of incremental control, a slow tightening of constraints so gradual I had never felt the restriction until it was complete. More painful was recognizing my own complicity. I had surrendered territories of my autonomy willingly, often with gratitude for being taken care of. I had accepted Orlando's framing of our relationship, his narrative of equal partnership, without questioning the subtle power imbalances that accumulated over years. The scholar in me recognized the classic progression: isolation, dependence creation, reality distortion, intermittent reinforcement through affection and approval. The pattern was textbook, something I might have identified immediately in a medieval text or a student's abusive relationship. Yet I had missed it in my own life, believing myself too educated, too independent, too aware to be manipulated. Pride had blinded me. The same academic confidence that made me effective in my profession had created a dangerous blind spot in my personal life, a belief that my intellectual capabilities somehow immunized me against emotional manipulation. "You're being too hard on yourself," Dr. Nicolette observed quietly, entering with my evening medication. Her unannounced appearance suggested she had been monitoring me, concerned about leaving me alone too long with my thoughts. I'm being realistic, I countered. 15 years, Nicolette. 15 years living with someone who was systematically positioning himself to benefit from my death. How do I reconcile the woman I thought I was? Observant, insightful, strong, with someone who missed something so fundamental. She sat across from me, administering my medication with practiced efficiency before responding. Intelligence doesn't make you immune to manipulation, Rosalie. In fact, highly intelligent people are often more vulnerable to certain types of deception precisely because they can't believe they would fall for simple manipulation tactics. That's not particularly comforting, I said with a mirthless laugh. It's not meant to be comforting. It's meant to be instructive. Her directness was one of the qualities I had come to value most. Recognizing the pattern now is what matters. Understanding how it happened prevents it from happening again. She was right, of course. This painful self-examination wasn't about assigning blame or flagellating myself for past blindness. It was about reclaiming my narrative through honest reflection. Understanding how Orlando had written himself into my story as the hero, while quietly positioning me as a character to be eventually written out. The medieval texts I studied were filled with women who transformed moments of greatest vulnerability into sources of unexpected strength. Morgan Le Fay cast out and labeled monstrous who created her own kingdom. Guinevere, betrayed and condemned, who found her voice in convent walls. Their power came not despite their suffering, but through their integration of it. Painful experiences, transformed into wisdom. I've been thinking about my research, I told Dr. Nicolette, watching darkness settle over the courtyard. All those medieval women I've studied, the ones male authors tried to silence or vilify, their stories were constantly rewritten by men who found their power threatening. Not unlike what Orlando is attempting with you, she observed. Rewriting your story to suit his purposes. Exactly. But what those medieval authors never understood was that the act of trying to erase these women often ensured their immortality. Their attempts to silence these women's voices simply amplified them across centuries. Something was crystallizing within me, a new understanding forming from the fragments of my shattered expectations. Orlando's betrayal wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was part of an ancient pattern of men attempting to control women's narratives, to benefit from their erasure. My entire academic career has focused on reclaiming women's agency in medieval literature, I continued, feeling energy returning to my voice. I've published books about how female characters resist narratives imposed upon them, how they create power in spaces where they're supposed to be powerless. Dr. Nicolette smiled slightly, recognizing where my thoughts were leading. And now you have the opportunity to apply that scholarship to your own life. Not just apply it, embody it, I corrected, straightening in my chair despite the physical discomfort. Orlando believes he's writing the end of my story. He doesn't realize he's merely providing material for my most important work. This critical reflection marked a turning point. I was no longer simply a victim fighting for survival. I was a scholar whose life had intersected with her subject matter in the most profound way possible. The patterns I had studied academically were now embedded in my lived experience, creating a unique perspective no other scholar in my field possessed. I'm going to write about this, I said with sudden certainty. Not just survive it, transform it. When I'm through, Orlando won't be the man who almost ended my story. He'll be a footnote in the book I write about reclaiming it. In that moment of clarity, the path forward emerged from the fog of betrayal and self-doubt. My reflection had revealed not just how I had been manipulated, but how that very experience connected me more deeply to the women whose stories I had spent my career illuminating. Orlando had tried to make me a character in his narrative. Instead, he had inadvertently given me the material to write my most authentic work. My critical reflection spawned a new strategy, one rooted not in defensive reaction, but in proactive reclamation. If Orlando was working to erase me while I was still breathing, Then I would ensure my presence became more indelible, not just in my medical recovery, but in every sphere he sought to remove me from. "We've been thinking about this wrong," I told my assembled team the following morning. Dr. Nicolette, Claudine, Lenny, and Joel gathered in the recovery apartment's living area, coffee cups in hand, still primarily focused on countering Orlando's immediate threats. "How so?" Lenny asked, momentarily looking up from the legal briefs he was preparing to counter my voluntary retirement from the university. "We're playing defense when we should be playing offense," I explained. "Orlando's strategy depends on my gradual erasure, from the university, from our home, from my professional identity. He's counting on my weakness, allowing him to systematically dismantle my life while I'm too focused on survival to notice or resist." "That's why we're here," Joel pointed out. "To prevent that erasure while you focus on recovery." "And I'm grateful," I acknowledged. "But protection isn't enough. We need to establish my presence more firmly than ever, in ways Orlando can't counter without exposing his true intentions." My new strategy was threefold, designed to secure not just my physical survival but my complete identity. First, we would document my medical improvement with independent experts, creating irrefutable evidence that directly contradicted Orlando's narrative of my decline. Dr. Rashid Khan would oversee this aspect, conducting comprehensive evaluations that would be notarized and filed with multiple authorities. Second, we would reassert my professional presence through remote engagement. My department chair, Sylvia, had already offered support. Now I would leverage that to conduct virtual guest lectures, participate in faculty meetings via video conference, and demonstrate my continued academic capability despite treatment. Third, and most crucially, we would begin gathering evidence for criminal charges against Orlando, moving beyond civil protections to build a case that would permanently remove his ability to threaten me. Instead of just blocking his access to my life, I explained, we make my continued existence so publicly established that any harm coming to me would immediately implicate him. We create a situation where my survival becomes his worst case scenario rather than his goal. Dr. Nicolette nodded slowly, understanding blooming in her expression. "This isn't just about protecting you anymore. It's about making your presence so documented, so publicly verified, that he can't continue his plan without raising immediate suspicion." Exactly. We flipped the script. Instead of me being isolated and him having all the social connection, we reverse that dynamic. We make me visible, to colleagues, to the university administration, to our social circle, while simultaneously restricting his ability to control the narrative. Lenny's legal mind quickly processed the strategic implications. This changes how we approach the university situation. Instead of just fighting the retirement, we request accommodations for remote work during treatment, demonstrating your capacity and commitment while creating documentation of your continued competence. Joel added the security dimension. And we expand surveillance at your home and office. If Orlando's trying to remove evidence of your existence, we document every item he touches, creating a record of systematic erasure that builds our criminal case. The energy in the room shifted palpably as my team transitioned from defensive protection to strategic counteroffensive. Orlando had been operating under the assumption that my isolation was his advantage. He never anticipated that I would transform that very isolation into an opportunity to rebuild my existence on stronger foundations, ones he could not undermine without exposing himself. "Let's begin immediately," I said, feeling strength flowing back into my voice and purpose. "Orlando thinks cancer is writing my ending. Let's show him it's actually the beginning of a story he never anticipated." The implementation of our new strategy coincided with a significant milestone in my cancer treatment, my final scheduled chemotherapy session. The timing felt symbolic, a convergence of medical and personal reclamation that fueled my renewed determination. Dr. Nicolette administered the treatment herself in the secure recovery apartment, the familiar burn of chemicals flowing into my veins now carrying a different meaning. This was no longer just medicine fighting disease. It was a metaphor for the toxicity I was purging from every aspect of my life. "How are you feeling?" she asked, monitoring my vitals with professional attention that couldn't entirely mask her personal investment in my recovery. "Stronger," I answered truthfully. The word encompassed more than physical resilience. It acknowledged the psychological fortification that had occurred alongside my body's healing. The physical toll of chemotherapy remained significant. My body was still gaunt, my movements deliberate. To conserve energy, my immune system compromised. But these external manifestations of illness no longer defined my internal experience. Where once I had felt diminished by cancer, I now recognized how it had stripped away pretenses and revealed essential truths. "I've been thinking about medieval purification rituals," I told Dr. Nicolette, as the medication dripped steadily into my veins. How illness was often viewed as both punishment and opportunity, a physical manifestation of spiritual imbalance that, once addressed, left the sufferer fundamentally transformed. She adjusted the flow rate slightly before responding. "Finding meaning in suffering is a universal human impulse. Though as a doctor, I'm more concerned with eliminating the suffering than interpreting it. The interpretation is what gives me strength," I explained. "If this is just random cellular mutation and Orlando's betrayal just bad luck in partner selection, then I'm merely a victim of unfortunate circumstances. But if I understand these experiences as revelatory, as painful but necessary illuminations, then I have agency even in suffering." This perspective wasn't just philosophical comfort, it was the foundation of my renewed determination. The cancer had revealed Orlando's true nature, had stripped away the comfortable illusions of my marriage, had forced me to confront limitations and vulnerabilities I had previously denied. These revelations, though painful, provided the clarity I needed to reclaim my narrative with unprecedented authenticity. My renewed determination manifested in practical actions that gathered momentum with each passing day. Through Sylvia's assistance, I recorded a brief video message for my department colleagues, explaining my temporary remote status while demonstrating my continued intellectual engagement. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages of support, offers of assistance, expressions of outrage at Orlando's attempts to push through my retirement. Lenny successfully filed emergency injunctions preventing any changes to my university employment status without court approval. The legal documentation explicitly cited concerns about coercion and misrepresentation, creating the first public record of potential misconduct by Orlando. Most significantly, I began writing. Again, not academic analysis, but personal testimony. Each day, I documented Orlando's actions, his deceptions, his strategies for erasure, creating a contemporaneous record that would serve both therapeutic and evidential purposes. This writing became a ritual of reclamation, each word a declaration, that my voice would not be silenced. "Your oncology markers are improving consistently," Dr. Nicolette informed me, reviewing my latest blood work results. "We'll need to confirm with imaging, but all indications suggest the treatment is working exactly as we hoped." The medical prognosis reinforced my psychological resolve. Cancer was retreating from my body, just as Orlando's influence was being systematically extracted from my life. Both treatments were rigorous, both caused significant discomfort, and both were ultimately necessary for genuine healing. My renewed determination wasn't merely about surviving either threat. It was about emerging transformed, not just recovering. What had been before diagnosis and betrayal, but creating something more authentic, more resilient, more truly mine than what Orlando had nearly destroyed. "I'm not just going to survive this," I told my team during our daily strategy session. "I'm going to transform it into something Orlando never anticipated. A complete reclamation of my narrative on terms he cannot control or manipulate." The GUR. Determination in my voice surprised even me. A strength that emanated not despite my physical weakness, but somehow because of it. Cancer and betrayal had stripped me down to essentials, burning away pretenses and accommodations that had allowed Orlando's manipulation to go undetected for so long. What remained was a core self, uncompromised and clear-eyed, with renewed determination to not just recover my life, but to redefine it entirely on my own terms. Events accelerated with breathtaking speed once our strategy shifted from defense to offense. What had been a careful chess match transformed into a multi-front campaign, with developments occurring simultaneously across medical, legal, professional, and personal battlegrounds. On the medical front, Dr. Rashid Khan's independent evaluation confirmed what Dr. Nicolette had been documenting. My cancer was responding remarkably well to treatment. The tumors had shrunk by nearly 60%, my blood markers showed significant improvement, and my overall prognosis had shifted from guarded to cautiously optimistic. This directly contradicts the narrative Orlando has been presenting. To your colleagues and friends, Dr. Khan observed, reviewing his findings with our core team. He's been describing imminent decline while your actual medical trajectory shows consistent improvement. This discrepancy became a powerful weapon. Dr. Khan's report, formally notarized and filed with the Hospital Ethics Committee, created an official record that Orlando's representations about my health were not just mistaken, but deliberately falsified. Simultaneously, Lenny's legal counteroffensive gained momentum. The emergency injunctions protecting my university position expanded to freeze all joint financial accounts, prevent any property transfers, and secure my intellectual property rights. Orlando suddenly found himself unable to access the resources he had been systematically appropriating. He's getting desperate, Joel reported during our morning briefing, reviewing security footage from our home. Yesterday, he spent nearly 4 hours searching your office, going through bookshelves, removing paintings from walls. Looking for the backup research materials he can't find, I surmised. The originals of contracts he's trying to alter. The surveillance cameras captured Orlando's increasing frustration as he discovered that key documents, original book contracts, research grant agreements, property deeds, were no longer where he expected them to be. Lenny had secured these materials weeks earlier, replacing them with subtly altered copies that would further undermine Orlando's credibility if he attempted to use them. On the professional front, my virtual presence at the university created its own acceleration. What began as a simple recorded message to my department expanded into remote participation in a doctoral dissertation defense, a guest lecture in my graduate seminar, and a scheduled appearance at the upcoming Faculty Senate meeting to discuss accommodations for professors undergoing medical treatment. Each appearance not only reinforced my continued professional capacity, but also created witnesses to my coherence, directly contradicting Orlando's claims about my cognitive decline. The support from colleagues, initially sympathetic but increasingly indignant as the truth emerged, formed a protective academic community that Orlando could no longer manipulate. Perhaps most significantly, Emma's involvement in the conspiracy began to unravel. Audrey, her roommate, provided Claudine with recordings of several phone conversations between Emma and Orlando that revealed the extent of their planning. "We need to act faster," Emma urged in one particularly damning exchange. "The house needs to be cleared before she gets any ideas about coming back. The movers are booked for Tuesday." "Don't worry about Rosalie," Orlando's voice replied with chilling dismissiveness. "She's not coming back to this house. The doctors are talking about long-term care facilities at this point." Another blatant lie, but one that revealed their intentions with unmistakable clarity. The convergence of these developments created an acceleration that Orlando couldn't counter. Each morning brought new protective measures enacted, new evidence secured, new witnesses to his deception identified. The careful groundwork we had laid during my hospital confinement now yielded results at a pace that left him increasingly reactive rather than strategic. When Orlando attempted to visit me at the hospital, discovering I had been moved to an undisclosed location, His carefully maintained facade cracked visibly. Security cameras captured his confrontation with hospital administration. His demand to know my whereabouts as my medical proxy met with the calm explanation that his status had been legally revoked. "He's making mistakes," Joel observed, reviewing the footage. "Getting sloppy, emotional. That works in our favor." The acceleration wasn't just in our counteroffensive, but in Orlando's unraveling. The narrative he had constructed, grieving husband, managing his dying wife's affairs, was collapsing under the weight of contradictory evidence and his own increasingly erratic behavior. I watched these developments from my recovery apartment with the clinical detachment of an academic observing a case study. My emotional connection to Orlando now replaced by analytical assessment of his tactical errors. Each day brought new evidence, new protections, new allies to our cause, while Orlando found his carefully constructed world disintegrating around him with dizzying speed. The action was accelerating toward an inevitable confrontation, one that would determine not just my physical safety but the reclamation of my entire existence. As the confrontation with Orlando approached, our team entered a phase of final preparation, consolidating evidence, securing additional protections, and strengthening alliances across every domain of my life. Legal preparations took center stage, with Lenny assembling a comprehensive case file that documented Orlando's systematic attempts to divert my assets, appropriate my research, and potentially hasten my death. What had begun as civil protections had evolved into potential criminal charges: financial fraud, intellectual property theft, medical endangerment, and attempted homicide. "The evidence is substantial," Lenny confirmed, arranging documents in meticulous chronological order. Medication tampering, fraudulent medical orders, unauthorized financial transfers, falsified university documents. The pattern of intentional harm is clear and consistent. Dr. Nicolette contributed crucial medical documentation, including laboratory analysis of the tampered medication Orlando had administered during my home care period. The precision of the tampering, pills that appeared intact but contained reduced, active ingredients, demonstrated premeditation rather than opportunistic theft. "This wasn't someone taking pills for themselves," she explained, reviewing the forensic reports. "This was deliberate dilution of prescribed medication with the apparent intent to reduce efficacy while maintaining the appearance of proper treatment." Joel's security team completed the installation of additional monitoring systems in our home, my university office, and Orlando's workspaces, creating comprehensive surveillance that would document any further attempts at evidence removal or tampering. "We've secured the perimeter," he reported. "Any access to your properties or accounts now triggers immediate alerts. Nothing moves without our knowledge." My physical recovery continued to accelerate, timing that seemed fortuitously aligned with our strategic needs. The final post-chemotherapy assessment showed continued reduction in tumor markers, improved energy levels, and increasing physical resilience. While I remained far from fully recovered, I had progressed beyond the fragile patient Orlando believed me to be. "You're strong enough now," Dr. Nicolette confirmed after completing my examination. "Both medically and legally, you're positioned to confront him from a place of relative strength rather than vulnerability." This medical improvement enabled the most crucial element of our final preparation: my first public appearance since orchestrating my disappearance from the hospital. Carefully planned with Joel's security team, I would attend the university's faculty senate meeting scheduled for the following day, a controlled environment where Orlando would be present but unable to act impulsively without witnesses. The element of surprise is significant, Claudine noted as we reviewed the logistics. "He believes you're either still hospitalized or transferred to an undisclosed long-term care facility. Your appearance in a professional setting, demonstrating obvious improvement, will directly contradict the narrative he's been constructing." This public reemergence required careful staging. Dr. Nicolette and Claudine worked together on my physical presentation, professional attire that accommodated my still recovering body, subtle makeup that minimized the lingering effects of chemotherapy, a stylish head wrap that transformed my hair loss from medical signifier to fashion statement. Your transformation was remarkable. Looking in the mirror after their ministrations, I saw not the cancer patient Orlando had been describing to colleagues, but Professor Rosalie Bennett, altered by experience but unmistakably present and professional. The visual impact alone will be significant, Sylvia observed during her final preparatory visit. Orlando has been so effective at painting a picture of your decline that your physical presence, especially looking so much stronger than expected, will immediately undermine his credibility. Beyond physical preparation, I rehearsed my planned statement for the Faculty Senate, a carefully crafted address that would simultaneously announce my continued professional engagement, acknowledge my medical challenges, and establish boundaries regarding my personal circumstances. The language was precise, reviewed by both Lenny for legal implications and Dr. Nicolette for medical accuracy. Remember, Lenny cautioned during our final review, the goal tomorrow isn't confrontation but strategic positioning. Your presence alone accomplishes most of our objectives. Orlando's reaction will determine our next steps. As evening approached on the day before my planned reappearance, our team gathered for a final coordination meeting. Security protocols were confirmed, transportation arranged, contingency plans established for various possible scenarios. Nothing was left to chance. Every detail had been considered and addressed. In the quiet that followed their departure, I stood at the window of my recovery apartment, watching darkness settle over the hospital grounds. Tomorrow would mark a definitive shift from preparation to action, from strategy to implementation. The careful groundwork of weeks would culminate in a single, powerful statement of presence, a declaration that the woman Orlando had tried to erase was very much alive, aware, and ready to reclaim her narrative. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Dr. Nicolette asked, returning to check my evening medication. "More than ready," I replied, turning from the window with newfound determination. Orlando has been writing my ending. Tomorrow, I start writing his. The university's Harper Hall housed the monthly Faculty Senate meetings in its oak-paneled main chamber, a space designed to evoke academic gravitas with its high ceilings, portrait-lined walls, and horseshoe arrangement of tables that placed speakers at the focal point of collective attention. Under normal circumstances, I found the room's theatricality slightly pretentious. Today, its dramatic architecture served our purposes perfectly. I arrived precisely 7 minutes after the meeting commenced, timing calculated to ensure Orlando would be present, but the proceedings not yet too advanced. Joel positioned security personnel at discrete intervals. 2 campus officers he had personally briefed, Claudine stationed as a medical attendant, and Lenny seated near the back, legal documents at the ready. Dr. Nicolette waited in a vehicle, outside, monitoring the situation via text updates from Claudine. Our team was positioned, our strategy set, our timing precise. Department Chair. Sylvia Mitchell had just finished administrative announcements when I entered through the chamber's main doors. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations halted mid-sentence, heads turned in unified surprise, and a wave of murmurs rippled through the assembled faculty. Orlando sat near the front, his back to the entrance, engaged in conversation, with Emma, who had apparently accompanied him as his research assistant. It was Sylvia's sudden silence that alerted him, causing him to turn just as I took my first steps into the chamber. The transformation that overtook his expression in those few seconds contained everything we had anticipated. Shock giving way to confusion, confusion yielding to calculation, calculation faltering into barely suppressed panic. In that unguarded moment before he could reassemble his facade, Orlando revealed the truth of his deception to every watchful faculty member in the room. "I apologize for interrupting," I said, my voice stronger and steadier than even I had expected. "And for my unexpected appearance. As many of you know, I've been undergoing cancer treatment, but my doctors have cleared me for limited professional engagement as part of my recovery process. Sylvia, composed as always, seamlessly incorporated my arrival into the meeting's flow. Professor Bennett, we're delighted to see you. Your timing is excellent, as we were about to discuss accommodations for faculty with medical considerations. I moved toward the speaker's position at the center of the horseshoe, each step deliberate and controlled. As I passed Orlando, our eyes met briefly, his wide with barely contained alarm, mine calm with the certainty of carefully orchestrated purpose. Emma, less practiced in deception, visibly paled beside him. She had been told I was incapacitated, declining, effectively removed from the equation of their future. My presence, professional, composed, and very much cognizant, directly contradicted everything Orlando had led her to believe. "Thank you, Chair Mitchell," I said, taking my position at the focal point of the chamber. "I've prepared some thoughts on how departments might better support faculty navigating serious medical challenges while maintaining appropriate academic engagement." The statement I delivered was ostensibly about institutional policy, but its subtext was unmistakable to Orlando and increasingly apparent to my colleagues. I spoke of transparency in medical accommodation, of protection against professional displacement during treatment, of safeguarding intellectual property and academic identity during periods of vulnerability. When illness strikes, I continued, making eye contact with various colleagues around the room, it creates openings for exploitation that our current policies don't adequately address. Medical challenges can be compounded by professional vulnerabilities, particularly when others attempt to use a colleague's diagnosis to advance their own interests. Orlando's composure cracked further with each carefully chosen phrase. His attempts to maintain a supportive expression grew increasingly strained, the disconnect between his public persona and private actions becoming visible to everyone present. The climax came when I directly addressed my own situation. As some of you may have heard conflicting information about my condition, I want to clarify that my treatment is progressing positively. Despite attempts to suggest otherwise, my doctors are optimistic about my prognosis, and I anticipate returning to full teaching responsibilities next semester. At this, Orlando finally broke. He stood abruptly, papers scattering from his lap. "This is inappropriate," he interrupted, voice tight with barely controlled panic. "My wife is not well enough to be making professional commitments. Her doctors have advised complete rest and—" "Which doctors would those be, Professor Matthews?" Sylvia intervened smoothly. "Because Dr. Nicolette Bernard, Professor Bennett's primary oncologist, has provided documentation supporting her partial return to professional engagement." The trap closed perfectly. Any further objection from Orlando would require him to contradict medical professionals and documentation he hadn't anticipated. Any attempt to reassert control would only demonstrate the very behavior my statement had addressed. He stood frozen between impossible options, the carefully constructed narrative he had built over months collapsing in a single, devastating moment of public exposure. "Perhaps," I suggested with deliberate gentleness, "we should continue this discussion privately after the meeting. I'm sure the Faculty Senate has other important matters to address." The confrontation had achieved its purpose. Without directly accusing Orlando, without revealing the full extent of his betrayal, I had publicly established my continued capacity, contradicted his false narrative, and created witnesses to his inappropriate attempt to control my professional standing. As Orlando sank back into his seat, visibly shaken, I completed my statement and took a seat at the opposite end of the chamber, surrounded by supportive colleagues who had just witnessed the first act of my reclamation. The climactic confrontation hadn't required dramatic accusations or explosive revelations. It had required only my presence, alive, aware, and unbowed, in precisely the space where Orlando had been systematically erasing me. The aftermath of the Faculty Senate confrontation unfolded with the inexorable logic of a well-crafted academic conclusion. What Orlando had spent months constructing, the narrative of my decline, the justification for his appropriation of my professional and personal resources, the foundation for his future with Emma, collapsed with remarkable speed once exposed to public scrutiny. We had anticipated that Orlando might attempt damage control, might try to reframe the situation or salvage some portion of his plan. Instead, he chose flight, both literal and figurative. Security cameras captured him returning to our home directly after the meeting, hastily packing a suitcase, and departing with several boxes of documents and a laptop. Classic guilty behavior, Joel observed as we reviewed the footage. He's panicking, grabbing what he thinks might incriminate him without realizing we've already documented everything. Orlando's sudden departure accelerated our timeline. With evidence of his flight in hand, Lenny immediately filed the comprehensive legal cases we had prepared: emergency protective orders, formal complaints of financial fraud, documentation of intellectual property theft, and preliminary criminal charges related to medication tampering. The court granted everything, Lenny reported 24 hours later, uncharacteristic satisfaction evident in his voice. Full protection orders barring him from your home, your office, and any location where you're present. Freezing of all financial accounts pending investigation. And most importantly, the police have issued a warrant for his arrest related to the medication evidence. Orlando's disappearance proved short-lived. Campus police located him in a downtown hotel the following morning, where he had apparently been holed up with Emma, frantically attempting to book flights to various international destinations. He actually used your credit card, Claudine said, not bothering to hide her disbelief at such a basic error. After everything, he still tried to use your financial resources to escape the consequences of what he did to you. This final act of appropriation became the capstone of the criminal case. Police took Orlando into custody on the initial charges of medication tampering and fraud, with additional charges pending further investigation. Emma, faced with the full reality of her situation, quickly accepted immunity in exchange for complete testimony about their plans. Her statement, as relayed to us by the detective handling the case, confirmed our worst suspicions while adding details even we hadn't uncovered. Orlando had been planning my replacement since before my diagnosis, had seen my cancer as an opportunity rather than a tragedy, and had systematically coached Emma on how to assume both my professional and personal positions once I was out of the picture. He told me it was just a matter of time, Emma's statement read, that the prognosis was much worse than anyone was saying publicly. He said we were just accelerating the inevitable. My return to our home occurred 3 days after Orlando's arrest, an experience both surreal and cathartic. Joel's security team had swept the property, removing surveillance devices Orlando had installed to monitor my movements before my hospitalization. Claudine accompanied me, both for medical support and emotional grounding as I reclaimed my space. The evidence of their occupation was everywhere. Emma's clothes still hanging in my closet, her toiletries arranged on my bathroom counter, her books mingled with mine on bedside tables. More disturbing were the subtle erasures, family photos removed from walls, personal mementos missing from shelves, spaces where my presence had been systematically reduced to accommodate hers. We should document everything, Claudine suggested, gently, seeing my reaction to these tangible manifestations of betrayal. For the case, but also for your own processing. She was right. We photographed each alteration, each appropriation, each erasure, creating a visual record of Orlando's methodical attempt to replace me in my own home, just as he had attempted to replace me in my professional life. The resolution extended beyond legal consequences and physical reclamation. As news of Orlando's arrest spread through academic circles, colleagues I hadn't heard from in years reached out with support and, often, with revelations about interactions with Orlando that had troubled them but hadn't seemed significant in isolation. He asked me to remove you from the Whitley Award Committee last month, confessed the department's awards chair. Said you'd requested it due to health concerns. I should have confirmed directly with you. I'm so sorry. These revelations formed a mosaic of manipulation. Dozens of small deceptions that, taken together, revealed the comprehensive nature of Orlando's betrayal. Each disclosure reinforced the rightness of our response, the necessity of the boundaries, now legally enforced. Dr. Nicolette, ever practical, focused on translating this resolution into continued healing. The stress of confrontation and legal proceedings could impact your recovery, she cautioned during my weekly examination. We need to balance justice with ongoing treatment considerations. She was right, of course. The resolution of Orlando's betrayal marked not an ending but a transition, from crisis response to sustained recovery, from reactive protection to proactive reconstruction. My body still required healing. My professional standing still needed reinforcement. My home still needed reclamation from the shadows of betrayal that lingered in its corners. But the fundamental threat had been neutralized. Orlando was facing criminal charges that would likely result in significant prison time. Emma had retreated completely, accepting academic probation and transferring to another university. My financial resources and intellectual property had been secured against further appropriation. Most importantly, the narrative Orlando had so carefully constructed of my decline, erasure, and replacement had been decisively overwritten by the truth. The resolution wasn't just legal or practical, it was existential, a reclaiming of authorship over my own story. 6 months after Orlando's arrest, I stood at the podium in Westlake University's largest lecture hall, preparing to deliver the opening address for a symposium I had organized. Vulnerability and Voice, Power Dynamics in Medical and Academic Contexts. The room was filled beyond capacity. Colleagues from across disciplines gathered to explore how illness and institutional structures create opportunities for exploitation and resistance. My body still bore the markers of my battle with cancer, a certain gauntness in my cheeks, a carefully tied scarf concealing hair still growing back in uneven patterns. But these physical signs of vulnerability now read differently against my straight posture, clear voice, and unwavering gaze. What Orlando had tried to frame as weakness had become visible strength, earned through survival of both disease and betrayal. Transformation, I began, is rarely voluntary. Often it arrives through crisis, illness, loss, betrayal, forcing us to reconstruct ourselves from fragments of what we thought we knew. The question isn't whether we will be transformed by crisis, but how we will incorporate that transformation into our understanding of ourselves. In the 6 months since the climactic confrontation in the faculty senate, my transformation had manifested across every dimension of my existence. Medically, my cancer had responded completely to treatment, with my most recent scans showing no detectable disease, a remission Dr. Nicolette described as remarkably robust. While ongoing monitoring would remain part of my life, I had transitioned from patient to survivor. Professionally, my experience had catalyzed a new direction in my research. My academic focus had expanded from medieval women's narratives to include contemporary power dynamics in institutional settings, exploring how modern structures perpetuate ancient patterns of silencing and erasure. The symposium represented the first public manifestation of this evolution in my scholarly identity. Personally, the transformation was perhaps most profound. I had sold the house Orlando and I had shared, unable to fully reclaim spaces so thoroughly, contaminated by betrayal. My new home, a light-filled apartment overlooking the University Botanical Gardens, contained only objects and memories that were authentically mine. Dr. Nicolette, Claudine, Joel, and Lenny remained part of my life, their roles evolving from protectors to friends as the crisis that had united us receded. True transformation, I continued in my address, requires not just surviving crisis but integrating it. recognizing how our wounds become apertures through which new understanding enters, how our broken places become sources of unique insight, unavailable to those with uninterrupted lives. Orlando's betrayal had irrevocably altered my understanding of trust, partnership, and vulnerability. But rather than closing me off from connection, this painful knowledge had paradoxically opened me to deeper, more authentic relationships, ones built on full awareness of human capacity for both compassion and cruelty. As I surveyed the gathered academic community, I recognized that my story had become more than personal narrative. It had transformed into a case study in resistance, a template for recognizing and countering attempts at erasure, whether medical, professional, or personal. The ultimate reclamation, I concluded, isn't returning to who we were before crisis, transformed us. It's fully becoming who we were always meant to be, authors of our own stories, even when others attempt to seize the pen. The transformation was complete, not because cancer and betrayal were forgotten, but because they had been incorporated, transformed from weapons of destruction into tools for reconstruction. In trying to erase me, Orlando had inadvertently revealed my most essential self, a self now fully reclaimed and irrevocably mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.